Multiple ambassadors to the United Nations, including U.S. allies, criticized the raid on Venezuela. The focus in the country now has turned to security after Nicolás Maduro's vice president, Delcy Rodriguez, was sworn in as acting president. We begin with this report from CGTN's Stephen Gibbs in Caracas.
This city and many cities we've been hearing across the entire country really quiet as people take in what has happened, the momentous events over the last 3 days here. Now, what I've been seeing is that shops, which actually in the last few days have been quite crowded as people have stocked up, there's a bit of a sign that things are running out. I've seen some empty shelves in shops around where I am talking to you from. Now, another reason why people don't go out, of course, is the security concerns. And visibly, you see sort of two sides to that. One is the conventional military here are out a bit in force. I came up from the airport yesterday. I saw some military equipment on the road, main road into Caracas, appearing to be preparing in case there was some kind of land attack. Also, we're seeing what are called the colectivos here, which are sort of citizen groups, citizen armed groups often, which are in support of the government, patrolling parts of the city and searching people and asking questions. That is not totally unusual here, but there are a lot more of them than there are usually, and that has also caused some concerns for the citizens. And what we're seeing is Delcy Rodriguez, who was vice president here from 2018, so a real sort of government insider. She was sworn in formally in the National Assembly yesterday. There are a whole lot of senior figures around her that are the same people that were in power before the events of Saturday night. So we're missing a president, but the rest of the senior team around him are in place, and they are really trying to give this message of continuity. That's not to say this isn't a complicated situation, and that is partly why, you know, we're seeing people here sort of hunkering down to a certain extent, wondering which way this might go. But if you watch the television and you sort of walk around the city and travel in the country here, it's pretty obvious that the same government is in charge that was in charge before the events.
Stephen Gibbs reporting there. Well, later in the show, our panel will weigh in on major developments, but we begin with my earlier conversation with geopolitics expert Trita Parsi. There are all kinds of questions being raised right now on why the United States conducted this military assault against Venezuela, attacked the country and forcibly seized the country's president, Nicolás Maduro, as well as his wife, Celia Flores. We heard all kinds of reasons, that this was about drug trafficking, it was about democracy, it was about threats to U.S. national security. In fact, your organization, the Quincy Institute, released a statement saying military force is justified only in response to a clear, credible, and imminent threat to the security of the United States or its treaty allies, and that Venezuela did not pose a threat to the United States. So what, in your view, was behind this?
I think a key part behind this, of course, is Venezuela's oil. And it's not necessarily for the U.S.'s own consumption, but rather for the U.S.'s ability to have a greater control over the global oil markets. One thing that is much clearer from the Trump administration than it would have been from any other administration is that this is absolutely not about democracy. This is not about the well-being of the Venezuelan people. This is not about their freedoms or anything like that. Trump mentioned oil plenty of times. He mentioned democracy 0 times, human rights 0 times, and previous motivations or justifications or pretexts such as fentanyl, etc., is also largely erased from the government narrative at this point.
Trita, if this is about oil, and we do know that Venezuela's oil production is not what it can be, it needs infrastructure, it needs investment. That kind of investment would take years, probably 5 to 10 years before it could get to full production. So what does that mean for the United States? And can the United States control that production of oil without having its military there?
Well, on the first point, it goes back to what I said. This is not about the U.S.'s own consumption. This is not about specific oil prices at the moment. It's the larger long-term perspective in terms of being able to have greater control over the oil that other countries, particularly rivals of the United States, would be consuming. And this is if we take a look at it from that pure geopolitical calculation that I believe the administration has made. And personally, I find that nevertheless to be highly problematic, not only because on a principle level, regime change or efforts of this kind to govern other countries is just simply wrong. And in consequence, we've also seen that this has been tremendously difficult and oftentimes backfired when the U.S. has done this in other places. And I think we should also remind ourselves that all of these other failed regime change efforts actually looked like successes in the short term. Iraq looked like a success for 6 months or so. Libya did so for a short while as well. Afghanistan as well. So the idea that this euphoria that currently exists because the military aspect of this was very, very successful does not in any way, shape, or form indicate that the rest of this is going to be successful and not backfire in the manner that Iraq, Libya, Afghanistan certainly did backfire, not only for the United States, but for the regions that those countries are in.
What is the broader message that this assault on Venezuela sends to the rest of the world and to the region as well? The initial response from European allies was very muted. That's allies of the United States, was very muted. But then we did see some more forceful statements being made at that UN Security Council meeting, which took place on Monday. But how do you think this will be seen around the world?
Well, first of all, the administration is trying to send is to say that the U.S. is now a full hegemon of the Western Hemisphere, that this is a hemisphere that the United States is going to keep its focus on. It is not abandoning empire, it's just abandoning the old contours of the empire, going from global hegemony to hemispheric hegemony. This, of course, will be of a tremendous concern, not just for a lot of the countries in South America who do not want to be under American or anyone else's hegemony, but also in the sense that it will signal to the, particularly to Europe, that the U.S. is now embracing a form of spheres of influence. What I think should be concerning to the world as a whole is that this erosion of international law is tremendously dangerous. I don't think we will fully appreciate what international law has delivered in terms of stability and peace for the world until we actually lose it. And we are now very close to losing it because of actions like this. And it is actually thanks to international law and the fact that after the signing of the UN Charter in 1945, and which the territorial bans were prohibited, that we saw a dramatic decrease. I mean, not a single country has has essentially been wiped off the map through conquest since then. We've seen a significant drop in the number of the amount of territory that has been lost as a result of conquest, a 95% drop. So we lived in a completely different world prior to this, in which actually violent conquest was accepted. And those countries that could do so essentially asserted a right to be able to control new territory. This is the world that we will be returning to if we completely abandon international law, allow it to be eroded in the manner that it currently unfortunately is.
Trita, Parsi, thanks for joining us.
Thank you so much for having me.
Okay, to discuss the U.S. actions in Latin America, let's bring in our panel. Here in Washington, D.C., Max Blumenthal is editor-in-chief of The Grayzone. From New York, Brian Becker is executive director of the Answer Coalition. And Jiang is director of the Center for Latin American Studies at Shanghai University. He joins us from Beijing. Welcome to all of you. Max Blumenthal, let me start with you. Good to see you. It's been a long time. But as we heard there from Trita, Parsi, this military assault by the United States and Venezuela was about oil, about the United States getting its hands on Venezuela's oil, but not necessarily for U.S. consumption. The U.S. wants to control where that oil goes, who gets it, and most importantly, how the recipient of that oil pays for that oil. How do you see it?
Well, first, at its core, this was a kidnapping made possible through a terrorist attack, and the kidnapping of a head of state who will be put on trial in a national court in the U.S. in violation of an International Court of Justice decision, meaning that the trial of Nicolás Maduro itself violates international law. This sets a precedent for the final destruction of international law through the implementation of the Don Roe Doctrine to allow the U.S. to take out further heads of state, either through kidnapping or bumping them off And I can actually see the US regime moving towards a more Israeli-style program of assassination if it doesn't get what it wants, which is just, as Mike Waltz, the UN representative, said today, to take control of countries that are sitting on top of oil reserves that the US believes is rightfully theirs. So the mask of democracy and the values of the shining city on the hill that Reagan or Clinton or Obama would, or Bush, cited in support of various interventions is off. And now we can see what the United States has always been towards Latin American countries, but the United States has finally shed any pretense of doing so in terms of values. And I think this really reflects poorly on the Democrats and the more progressive elements in the US and transatlantic media that have tried to make the case for regime change in the name of human rights or in the name of democracy, supporting a right-wing candidate like Maria Corina Machado. And ultimately, this is what they paved the way for, and this is what they get, and now they are feigning opposition.
Right, and Max, just on that point of the trial, as you point out, Nicolas Maduro was forcibly seized and moved to the United States. He was hauled into a court in New York. So is this in any way a legitimate legal exercise?
Well, as I said, it violates international law. This is also actually what the U.S. was trying to do to Julian Assange. But I just published analysis, or I could even say an indictment of the indictment of Nicolas Maduro and his associates, and one person he's not associated with, who's the head of a gang, Tren de Aragua, over which he has no control, which this is an indictment asserts he controls. And it's an absolute joke, a 25-page pile of heavily politicized slop filled with vague language. And one of the most interesting things about this indictment is that Nicolas Maduro, in order to make the case for his kidnapping and regime change, the Trump administration's DOJ said he was at the top of a cartel called the Cartel of the Suns. They said that in their 2020 indictment. They've only mentioned Cartel of the Suns twice in this, and they refer to it only as a loose criminal network. They basically abandoned the core of their original indictment for two reasons, really quickly. One, because they're acknowledging it never existed, and they don't even need this case anymore. And two, because the Cartel of the Suns was created by the CIA in the 1980s to ship drugs into the United States, and I don't think they want that to come out in the trial.
Brian, at his news conference shortly after this attack in Venezuela took place, President Trump did talk several times about oil in Venezuela, but he also said that the United States was liberating Venezuela from what he called a dictator. But if we look at what has happened right now, only Nicolas Maduro has been removed from office. The rest of the Venezuelan government that was there before Saturday last week are still in place. Those officials still remain in office. In fact, the Wall Street Journal had a report yesterday in which it said that the United States had come to the conclusion that it would need the Nicolas Maduro government in place to run Venezuela, that they did not have much trust in the opposition running Venezuela. What does this tell you?
Well, I think a more important way to look at this issue is what Stephen Miller said yesterday in the U.S. media, which is that they have the Venezuelan government surrounded, that they have a full naval blockade, that the Venezuelan government can only trade or do business when it is given or when it will be given permission by the Trump administration. So it doesn't really see the existing Venezuelan government, Delcy Rodriguez and the other forces who constitute part of the revolutionary core of the Venezuelan government. They do not see them as allies or proxies. They have a gun at their head. And really, Trump went in, captured, illegally kidnapped the head of state, Nicolas Maduro, brought him in chains to New York City. But there's a certain restraint on U.S. options, because if the Trump administration feels that it must carry out complete regime change or has the capability to do so, that will entail a bigger, greater military engagement, including having U.S. military forces on the ground in Venezuela. And 70% of the American people, even today, oppose any sort of war against Venezuela. They disagree with Trump's policy. They don't support the kidnapping of Nicolás Maduro. The idea that the U.S. could send troops into Venezuela, well, that will create a social explosion in the United States. So instead, the Trump administration is using extreme terror tactics against the existing Venezuelan government. They're treating Nicolás Maduro as something of a trophy. And then they're trying to say to the other governmental leaders in Venezuela or government leaders anywhere in the world who want to be independent, see what we can do, see what our military capacity is, see what military primacy gives us. We have the ability to come in and capture or kill any of you. So each of you should get down on your knees and do what we tell you to do. And the Venezuelan government is not going to do that. They are staying firm. Delcy Rodriguez said, Nicolás Maduro is our president, even if she, on an interim basis, assumed the office of the presidency. And millions of people in Venezuela are being mobilized. Even people who may have opposed the Maduro government politically are so mortified, so outraged by this illegal kidnapping of their president, whether they voted for him or not. Right now, the Venezuelan government is staying strong. So the only thing the Trump administration can do is threaten more killings, more kidnappings, more terror, and a naval blockade, which is clearly an act of war.
Jiang Shixue, to Brian's point about the warning that came from the United States to not just other countries in the region, but also to the world. I mean, what is the message that that sends to the world?
Well, as you know, that the Monroe Doctrine plays an important role in the foreign policy of the U.S. So I believe that the U.S. just wants to keep China out of its backyard. So the signal is very clear. But, well, I don't believe that the dream of the U.S. will come true. You know, China's relationship with the countries in Latin America is based on win-win cooperation in economic and trade areas. And as a matter of fact, you know, the U.S. should thank China for making investment or doing trade with countries in Latin America. Now, you know, the U.S. is concerned about the so-called inflow of illegal drugs or illegal migration. Then why there are these two kinds of things? Because the economy in Latin America is not well developed. Okay, so China's investment in the region and its trade with these countries can make the economy of Latin America develop faster and faster. So a more prosperous Latin America would be good for the U.S. Okay, so as the policy paper of China, which was published just 1 month ago, said, China welcomes so-called triple cooperation among China, U.S., and Latin America. And secondly, the policy paper also points out that China's relationship with the region is not targeting against any third party. Okay, and finally, China's policy paper also points out that well, China's relationship with Latin America will not be changed if even any third party wants to send a signal. So I believe that no matter what will happen in Venezuela, the future for China's relationship with Latin America will continue to move forward.
Right. Max, I want to get back to something that Brian said a moment ago, and that is that interview that Stephen Miller had on CNN in which he talked about the motives behind what the United States had done in Venezuela. Let's play part of that. Let's watch.
You can talk all you want about international niceties and everything else, but we live in a world, in the real world, Jake, that is governed by strength, that is governed by force, that is governed by power. By definition, we are in charge. We set the terms and conditions. We have a complete embargo on all of their oil and their ability to do commerce. So for them to do commerce, they need our permission. For them to be able to run an economy, they need our permission.
So, Max, there it is, all laid out there. What are your thoughts?
It's a straightforward distillation of traditional colonialist thinking that was also expressed in Congress today by Senator Tom Cotton, who is a creation of neocon godfather Paul Singer, who now owns Venezuela's formerly most profitable foreign asset, Citgo, through his Elliott Capital Management, and also funded the career of Marco Rubio. Tom Cotton said, if you do not do what I want, speaking to the Venezuelan government, we will continue to strangle you. Your lights will go out. You'll have no food and you'll have no energy, threatening the civilian population of Venezuela. They are just moving to terrorize Venezuela in order to demonstrate that they can get away with this. And they're boasting that approval has gone up for this operation, but that's within a slice of MAGA, within Trump's base, because there were no U.S. casualties that we know of, because it did not appear, did not appear to have been a major fight in which man pads were used, Russian-supplied anti-aircraft systems were deployed. It looked like from the point of view of an American neocolonialist, a very clean operation. So why not go do it somewhere else like Colombia, where Trump has threatened? Why not do it to Cuba? Why not do it to Mexico, which is supplying Cuba with oil and has a center-left government? And of course, there's Greenland. Maybe they'll declare that there's the Inuit cartel in Greenland, and all that white stuff we see isn't snow but cocaine, and they'll go seize Greenland. Why not? There's not enough pushback. So the Trump administration has this new national security doctrine, which declares essentially their control over the entire Western Hemisphere. They forecasted that. But if you look back at their previous doctrine in the first term, authored by Elbridge Colby, who's now in the NSC, they talk about strategic sequencing. Once they eliminate certain more immediate threats, they're going to move towards the real threat to the U.S. and American primacy, which is China. There's no reason to think that this will be limited to the Western Hemisphere if Trump and his cronies can get away with it. They have a very Israeli mentality here, and it's about assassinating and taking out leadership, and they will move through the entire globe in order to maintain unipolar dominance. This is not, they're not thinking in a multipolar way.
Brian, this, of course, also raises the very important question of how does the rest of the world, especially the developing world, protect itself from this kind of predatory behavior? We see the United States has already bombed Nigeria, for one. It carried out that bombing in Iran. It's threatened South Africa as well. In the last century, we saw the anti-colonial fight. You know, we had leaders like Mahatma Gandhi, like Nelson Mandela, Che Guevara, Ho Chi Minh. Are we going to see another group, a new era of anti-colonial leaders emerge to protect the world from this kind of behavior?
I think so. I think that it's inevitable, in fact. The U.S. always thinks that military supremacy means that the U.S. will ultimately prevail in wars against people in the global South, people who have suffered from colonialism. That was the thinking in Vietnam. That was certainly the thinking in the second Iraq War in 2003. The U.S. could disperse the government of Saddam Hussein in 3 weeks. They could do that. But then the resistance of the Iraqi people grew and grew because people in Iraq, like people in Gaza, like people anywhere, don't want to live under foreign occupation, don't want to live under colonial dominance. So I think we will go and are going through a new transition. The world has changed a great deal. The relationship of forces between the Western world, the United States, and the global South countries changed radically with the collapse of the Soviet Union and what was then called the socialist camp, who were the allies of countries in the global South that sought independence. But even with that said, even with this changed relationship of forces where there's more aggregate power, military power, certainly in the hands of the United States and NATO, I think the endeavor of all people to be free of colonial domination, people who, when they look at what Trump is saying and doing, saying, look, we're going to terrorize you because we can and you can't stop us. that turns people against the United States all over the world. But I also want to go back, people in the United States, on Saturday and Sunday, we had demonstrations in more than 140 cities, and that was within 12 hours. And frankly, if American troops go into Venezuela and stay in Venezuela, it won't be hundreds or thousands of people. It will be hundreds of thousands of people.
Right.
The American people, and I mean people who vote for Trump or people who voted Democrat, people who voted for independents or socialist candidates, people generally are against these kind of forever endless wars.
Yeah.
And I think that is a restraint on any U.S. government, including the Trump administration.
Jiang Shixue, I've just got a couple of minutes left, but I want to ask you about China's view on what has happened in terms of international law. I mean, how concerned is China that the system of international law has been eroded, if not completely broken, and what can China do to restore it?
Well, China's position on this issue is very clear. So China wants every country, including the United States, to respect the UN Charter as well as international relations. So China has contacted with some other countries to express their positions at the UN Security Council, as we have seen now. But personally, well, I myself is quite pessimistic about the future. Well, we have international laws, we have UN charters, but the U.S. just does not want to respect. So it's meaningless to have international laws and UN charter. So I remember that Chilean President Boric said that today is Venezuela, tomorrow it could be any country. Okay, so as you mentioned just now, that I hope that the global South as well as the countries can get united to resist this kind of hegemonic action in the future. Otherwise, it's really a pity that the human being. Now we are now in the year 2026. Right. Okay, so you cannot believe a president of a country, a sovereign country, could be kidnapped by its hegemonic power. So personally, my view is very pessimistic.
Right, and we have to leave it there. Thanks to all of you for being with us. That's it for this edition of The Heat. I'm Arnold Naidu in Washington.